expert reports indicating that 2,000 people die per year due to exposure to the polluted air.
That is only linked to ESCOM. Started by saying this area has been declared a priority area. And that declaration basically meant this area is highly polluted.
Yes.
Therefore, we need to come up with interventions. Air quality management plan is not working. But they were very reluctant to develop implementation regulations.
Yeah.
There is no way anybody would come and claim to say, if I move from coal to renewables, I will be able to replace the jobs one-on-one. That's highly impossible.
Yeah.
Biggest polluters we can talk about right now is ESCOM and Sasol.
Yeah. Okay. We're talking about environmental issues. Today, we're at groundWork. We're talking to Thomas Mnguni. He's an activist, a community activist for groundWork, which is an environmental organization. He's based in Mpumalanga here in the Emalahleni area. This area is part of it was declared a high priority area because of the polluted air that is here. According to studies, this is one of the most polluted areas in the whole world due to the mining, the power stations that are fueled by coal and other industries. Mr. Mnguni, welcome to the People's Eye podcast.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah. Briefly, you are in the area, you are an activist here. If you can give us a picture of air pollution in this area as an individual also on the ground, what is happening?
So I think one thing people need to note is that in this area, there's a lot of coal mining. I mean, I currently live in Middleburg. A couple of years back, one of my biggest neighbors used to be a mine. And because of the exposure of dust and how it impacted on the kids, I had to relocate. But I think I'm not the only one. If you just drive around Middleburg, you would see the number of families that live either close to a power station or a coal mine. And you begin to imagine that when it's dry, what kind of dust or the smoke that's coming from the power stations people are exposed to. And the unfortunate part is that all of that affects people's health. And in terms of our approach, I think ordinary people are just made to choose between work or health. And because work provides that income, most of us are desperate to earn that income. And we end up assuming that if I get a good salary, then I can take care of the family's health. Normally without even thinking about those who cannot afford private health care. And yeah, I mean, our economy was built on on mining. And the unfortunate part is that when that decision was made, it was made on an assumption that if we get cheaper electricity, and then we should be in a position to supply industry, and then jobs will be created. But on the flip side of it, if you are around Middleburg, Wheatbank, Delmas, you would also realize the high levels of unemployment, which kind of to me poses a question as to, okay, what happened to those jobs? Where are those jobs they've promised? You know, so for me, it's one of those concerns. But if you go to health facilities, or if you ask somebody who either has a bronchitis or has a family member with asthma or bronchitis, and you ask them what kind of services they get in the public health institutions, normally they will tell you the struggle, not only to get proper medication, but just to get attention. People going to a clinic at 4, and then at 4 in the afternoon, they still didn't have somebody to attend to them. And if they were lucky to be attended to, they're not even given fit for purpose medication. They'll just be given painkillers. So that basically tells you the wrong things about the economic system, which I would say we inherited from the apartheid government, but we never corrected as a democratic society. We stuck to it, and that's why mostly the previously disadvantaged are still disadvantaged, even though we said we will try and address the inequality issues.
Yeah, because the reason we're talking to you here is just trying to look at these issues clearly. There's an issue of air pollution that is caused by mining and power stations, but those are the main employers in the Highveld area. And then there's the issue of now the country needs to decarbonize and try to transition towards a green energy economy. With all of those issues in place, but there's a health issue that we have just spoken about. That look, people are dying. You may cry for jobs that are being created by the coal industry, that they are going to be, they are well, with the coal being phased out, those jobs are going to be lost. You can cry about that, but now here's the main thing: the health of the people. There have been many studies around the Highveld priority area, which it stretches from
exactly. Yeah.
From Eguruleni up to Mpumalanga.
Nkangala district to Gauteng district.
That involves towns like Middleburg, Witbank, Delmas,
Secunda, Emelo,
Standerton,
Leandra,
that
Evenda, all of those areas.
It's a 30,000
hectares
kilometer square area. People are getting sick there, and there have been reports. You'll know better. Expert reports indicating that 2,000 people die per year due to exposure to the polluted air.
That is only linked to ESCOM.
Only linked to
ESCOM. Yeah. So we've had several studies. I mean, we had Dr. Ronsa, who I think we had Mike Holland, both doing health reports. For groundWork and the Center for Environmental Rights. And the purpose of this was to show decision makers, especially politicians, to say, you need to act, you need to make decisive actions. And we're not asking them to do people a favor. We are saying we've got a constitution, and part of the constitution says we need to ensure that the environment is taken care of for our well-being right now, but for our kids as well, because they are the future generation.
Exactly.
So that's a social contract we have with government, and they have to deliver on it. So we're not asking government to do people a favor. All we're saying is, this is what we have to do. You have to protect people's rights. Now, that hasn't happened. You started by saying this area has been declared a priority area. And that declaration basically meant this area is highly polluted. Therefore, we need to come up with interventions to address pollution, to protect people's health. And it's like those interventions must yield positive results. It's immediate. It cannot be progressive.
Well, when was it declared a high priority area?
The area was declared a priority area in 2007. I would say it took us 5 years to develop an air quality management plan, which we finally had in 2012. And since 2012, nothing has happened.
So basically, after that declaration, just to simplify it for people, then government had to come up with ways of protecting the people against exposure to the polluted air.
That's right. So the air quality management plan basically seeks to address that. And it had a couple of goals to say, by year 2015, this is what we must achieve. By year 2020, this is what we must achieve. And I mean, just to make an example, in terms of the air quality management plan, everybody recognized the fact that government, especially local government, does not have the capacity to deal with air quality governance. There were no air quality officers, there were no environmental management inspectors. So that's one of the areas, for instance, would say government needs to build capacity. Since 2012 until 2015, they need to build capacity. They need to ensure that every municipality had an air quality management plan. It had enough budget to do monitoring and enforcement. It had the right tools, like for monitoring, to say where is the source of the pollution coming from, so that the polluter pay principle could apply. But by 2015, we had none of that. So if you look into the current situation and you say in 2015 we were supposed to have enough air quality officers, enough environmental management inspectors, but we still don't have enough of those, then we'd see how intentionally government is failing in terms of air quality governance. But also that led to a groundwork Center for Environmental Rights and Mnguni to say, wait a minute, let's do an assessment of the air quality management plan. Is it functional or is it completely dysfunctional? By 2017, we launched our report, which we titled back then Broken Promises. We called it Broken Promises because we were looking into the air quality management plan, which had clear commitments to say we must achieve this by 2015, but nothing was happening. And then we presented that to government, I think 2017 Air Quality Lekgotla, to say, this is the assessment we have done, and these are the outcomes, and these are the recommendations. And what was pressing in the regulations was, we had an air quality management plan which lacked the teeth to bite. You have a plan which you couldn't use to hold somebody accountable. It was just quiet. It was a plan, it's there. But if somebody was non-compliant, you couldn't use the plan to enforce compliance. So at that time, we called for the development of implementation regulations. But the minister and the air quality officer said, we're having none of that. We have the air quality management plan. But I think quite a nice coincidence that happened at that time. When we were doing our own midterm assessment of the plan, government was doing the same. Fortunately, we came up with the same resolution to say the air quality management plan is not working. But they were very reluctant to develop implementation regulations.
But it was there, it has been there since 2017. Was there anything done at all? Because you're mentioning a point of municipalities still not having the capacity since then.
Well, nothing much changed, except for the provincial government had to cede some of its competencies to the district in terms of licensing. So now the provincial government is no longer a licensing authority, but the district municipality is. But taking those functions also meant you must have your own inspectors. And there wasn't any inspector at the municipality. I think even recently we're still asking how many environmental management inspectors do we have? You know, because training an inspector is one thing, making sure that the inspector is properly designated, given the powers, you know, to have access to the facilities is the most important thing.
That's another thing.
So even recently, we're still fighting about that to say, what is the level of capacity? Are we getting enough human resource to deal with this thing? But again, out of that process, realizing that nothing is happening, I think we gave the minister from 2017, I think October, November, to respond to the broken promises. They promised to say, we'll provide you an extensive response by January 2018. That never happened all the way until 2019. In 2019, we said there's enough communication. We've waited for the minister in the department, so we're taking the matter to court. So we took the matter to court, and I'm not going to touch on all the orders we were asking for.
No, that's fine. But as you took the matter to court, what did you want to achieve?
So there are two things that I want to touch on, basically. The first one was for us to get the court to declare that what is currently happening in the Highveld is in violation of Section 24 of the Constitution, which speaks about a healthy environment. The second one was to ensure that they give an order that the minister must develop implementation regulations. Now, I would say the third one, which I kind of like, was that we needed clarity from the court to say Section 24 is not a progressive right. It is a right that must be realized immediately. We cannot postpone people's right to health or a healthy environment.
Yes.
It must be realized immediately. And fortunately, the court confirmed that to say this is not a progressive right. It must be realized immediately. They confirmed to say the levels of pollution in the Highveld are in violation of people's rights, especially Section 24.
It's a basic right to live in a clean environment.
And they ordered the minister to develop implementation regulations, which they've done after 2 years, because they've only been finalized last year, August. But that has been done. I think what is missing now is for us to see the implementation regulations working, because they cannot keep making excuses to say, we're setting up systems. But what is problematic now is, I think there is, I don't know whether it's intentional or what, but government is doing monitoring. They monitor the air. But what we have seen is that their data has been very unreliable, even though part of the order in court was give people reliable data, But we've seen most of the monitoring stations are becoming dysfunctional, and they have all sorts of excuses. So that they don't have the necessary analyzers, or they will tell you it's vandalism, or we didn't have power. But up until now, we still don't have reliable data. But interestingly enough, whether the data is reliable or not, even now, with the limited information they have, with most of, or some of the power monitoring stations being dysfunctional, we can still confirm that in terms of their assessments, air quality in this area is still in non-compliance, which basically tells you that there's a huge negative health impact people are still experiencing, irrespective of the fact that the matter was taken to court. They were ordered to develop regulations and ensure that they enforce them so that we can bring this area into compliance.
Exactly. But now, they may try everything they should try as government, or rather as the court has directed them, they should. But now the industries are here. The industries are emitting chemicals into the air. So what needs to happen? The industries need to reduce the amount of pollution they are emitting into the air. What is enough? How much should they let into the air? How much should they not? And that little bit of pollution that gets into the air, is it still not harmful to the people?
Look, industry should reduce. And to be frank with you, everybody should reduce. Even though in terms of health, I would argue there's no safe threshold. For as long as there's exposure, people will be affected, but they need to reduce. Now, we've got two types of standards. One, it's what we call the National Ambient Air Quality Standards. It's basically your ground level air. This is what you breathe. And that is as a result of the cumulative contribution of pollution. So each industry, when they pollute, all of that goes to the atmosphere. And once that is in the atmosphere, government monitors that so that we can determine whether it's safe for us to breathe or not. So that's what is polluted. But industry have their own standards, which we refer to as the minimum emission standards. So when they apply for their atmospheric emission license, so all the companies, they're compelled to have an atmospheric emission license. Now, when they apply for that license, it will tell them how much of what should be polluted. So we've got all of those minimum emission standards. Now, I don't think I will be doing justice if I'm going to refer to other industries. But at best, the biggest polluters we can talk about right now is Eskom and Sasol. So Sasol is the biggest emitter. Eskom is the biggest emitter. Whether you're looking into your greenhouse gases, which have a huge impact in terms of climate change, or you're looking into your ordinary pollutants like your SO2, NOx, or sulfur and nitrogen. These are the two biggest polluters. Now, instead of government ensuring that Eskom is in compliance, they allow Eskom to apply to break the law. So Eskom just basically says to government, listen, we cannot afford to comply with these standards. Therefore, we want to legally break these standards. So that's what we normally talk about when we say it's minimum emission standards postponements. So they apply to postpone compliance until they're in a position to do so. But in reality, I don't think that's going to happen.
The government often bends backwards for Eskom.
So previously we said, in 2015, when they applied to postpone the 2015 standards, the argument was, we are giving them postponement so that we give them an opportunity to retrofit their plans so that they can be in compliance with the 2020 standards. Now, 2020 standards have to apply. They apply for postponement again to say, we cannot. But this time around, they are using the energy crisis as an excuse to say, if we retrofit or if we close some of the plants because of non-compliance, then the country will be taken back to load shedding. And we cannot afford that. We need to grow the economy. We need the energy. So there's always an excuse. And even if you look into the minister's decision recently in terms of the MES postponements, one of the key things he's raising is to say, we need to secure energy security. If we close the plants, we cannot provide industry and people with energy. So there's always that excuse which puts ordinary people in a catch-22 situation. Your health or lights on.
Exactly.
And I don't think it's an honest thing, because again, it defeats the ends of the Constitution. Why do we have to make people choose between the rights they have? Because all of those rights must be immediately realizable. You don't have to say, no, I will practice this right, I'll choose electricity and have an income and forget my health. It's not enacted in the Constitution. It's not put like that in the Constitution.
There needs to be some sort of balance. But I'm not sure, according to you guys as in the Green Lobby, how do you strike a balance now? Clean air, you need clean air. People have to be healthy, of course. But people need jobs. They need to be able to sustain themselves. Where do you think the balance should be? How should things balance out?
Look, I would say from a groundwork perspective, we have always said, I think since 2005, we have said we need a just transition. And I'm saying just
energy transition.
As in the terms of justice.
Yes.
And justice should be in a position to address the issues of unemployment, poverty, inequality, decision-making processes. So if we want to achieve justice, one, we need to bring ordinary people on board.
Yes.
Two, we say we need to phase out fossil fuels, coal, gas. Completely. But we need to do that in a very responsible way.
Okay.
And one of the responsible ways is we need to engage with everyone to say, how will life turn out to be? For instance, I would say in the context of the Highveld, if we phase out coal, how are we going to live? Do we have sectors we can think about that can create sustainable jobs, decent jobs, not short-term jobs, decent long-term jobs?
Yes.
And if we have that honest discussion with everyone, workers, unemployed people, and then we put in resources into the plans, I'm sure that we can develop sectors. So okay. Right now,
the main question is, I hear that of employment. Sorry for cutting you there, but if we phase out all fossil energy, gas, coal, hydrogen, we need clean hydrogen, of course. Can green energy alone sustain the economy of South Africa? Can it?
Well, it can. I mean, for me, first, with the energy, we need to understand energy for who. Because now I live in the Highveld. I can tell you that the people who are living less than a kilometer away from Tuva Power Station only started having electricity in the past 3 years.
Yes.
All the time they've been living there, they never had electricity. We can drive around. There are a lot of people who do not have access to electricity. We can start talking to households. People will tell you, oh, I'm connected to the grid, but I can't afford. So the first question we need to ask is energy for who? So that when we develop our energy system.
For big industry.
Exactly, that's the problem. Because then that energy system still does not meet or speak to the needs and the development of individuals or people.
Yeah.
We prioritize profits over ordinary people. That's why even within the coal sector, because they prioritize profits, the destruction to the water, the destruction to people's health, the destruction to the land, the biodiversity, all of that was externalized to people who did not benefit in the coal sector. Now, if we change that paradigm and say we will prioritize ordinary people, then we will think about an energy system that speaks to the people, then industry later. But also, let's look into our social ownership model. Because currently, our economy is being driven by a few individuals.
Yeah.
Then, if you look, on one hand, we're saying we want to address the levels of inequality. But those high earners, the richer get richer, the poor get poorer. So then, how do we use the transition to make sure that you achieve justice in it? You promote it. You fight the levels of inequality, unemployment. So that's the most important aspect. But on the energy sector alone, the reality is there is no way anybody would come and claim to say, if I move from coal to renewables, I will be able to replace the jobs one-on-one. That's highly impossible.
Yeah.
We need to think about how we reindustrialize the sector.
Okay. The energy sector.
I mean, currently all of these panels they are putting, solar panels, the wind turbines, all of those are being imported. We are not manufacturing them locally. So before you could even think about that, you must think about creating a value chain. Can you manufacture these components locally? Because that will create jobs. But if you are going to focus on construction, like currently is the form, it's short-term jobs. You cannot plan your future with an 18-month contract. It's not sustainable. So that's first way you need to look. But to create jobs, you need to think beyond the energy sector.
Yeah.
There's health, there's transport, there's agriculture, there are other services we need to think about. And we need to understand which other sectors could create jobs. For instance, the most common example I normally give people, we know we have a very unreliable public transport system.
Yes.
But we also know that more and more people are shifting towards buying their own cars, which contributes to climate change because of the carbon emissions that comes from these vehicles.
Of course.
Now, we've got a very good network. It's still there. We've got the rail network. It's still there. If we fix that network so that it could be used for commuter transport, how many jobs do you think we can create? And we're not even talking about that right now. We're just looking into the energy sector. But I also want to make something clear. Yeah. Because I hear people keep talking about this. Green hydrogen.
Yes.
In order for one to develop green hydrogen, we need to realize you need a lot of energy to do that.
To do it, yeah.
And if you're going to do whether a solar plant or a wind farm, you need massive pieces of land to do that. Then once you get all of that land, you can start developing your energy plant. And then in order for you to develop hydrogen, you need water. Now, we're talking about South Africa being a water scarce country. We're talking about ordinary people who do not even have access to water.
Yeah.
Not even in rural areas. We're talking even Gauteng right now.
Yeah.
An urban settlement does not have access to water. There are a lot of water issues. Now, you want to if you close a power plant, the assumption should be we are going to save a lot of water because we know coal-fired power stations consume a lot of water.
Yes.
And if you save that water because the power plant has been closed, why not redirect that water to people rather than give it to industry to develop green hydrogen, which on the other side of it, most of us are not going to use it. So show me one household that says, I need access to green hydrogen. I'm sure there's none.
Yeah. No, where I'm sitting, it's a very difficult balancing act in terms of, phasing out fossil fuels, introducing green energy. Because even you were talking about the wind turbines and other green energy, what you call them? Green energy.
Solar PV.
Yeah, those things that are providing us green energy. They are manufacturing, they are not manufactured here. But to manufacture them, you need certain minerals as well from the ground. They are found in Africa, most of those reserves.
Some are in South Africa.
Some are in South Africa, of course, which basically means it's a chance for Africa to have these industries and industrialize. Africa's got an opportunity in green energy industrialization. But now, it is still mining. It has got its own environmental impacts.
We need to be careful about mining.
Yeah.
So we know there will be a demand for that. But I think what is tricky right now, and I haven't heard most of us talking about it, is to say, if I produce a turbine or a panel, solar panel, how much of that is reusable? How much of that is recyclable? So that we minimize the level of waste. But if we can reuse and recycle some of the components, it will have also an impact on how much raw materials we need to mine. Because if I have enough components today and I can reuse or recycle those components, then I don't need to mine carelessly like it's happening right now, especially within the coal sector. Yeah. I will try and minimize. But the other problem with that is it's difficult for me to talk about responsible mining because currently there is no such thing as responsible mining from what we have seen. They destroy land, they don't rehabilitate, they just move on. They destroy water, they don't clean it, they just move on.
Yeah, because I was raising that point because to produce those things, your solar panels, electric vehicles and so on, you need minerals, copper, lithium, nickel, cobalt, manganese, graphite, and others. And you've got to mine them, which now, if you're an environmentalist, it defeats the purpose.
Yeah, that's why I'm saying we need to be very careful because it's easy to say, oh, no, let's go RE without even realizing that, oh, wait a minute, now I'm creating another mining sector, because right from the onset, one of the biggest injustices, especially in Africa, not just South Africa, in Africa, is that we're still having mining companies who are destroying the environment and operating with impunity. Nobody is holding them accountable. Yeah. You hear your Minister Gwede Mantashe talking big. We want mining. But ask Gwede to hold the mines accountable. He never does that. So if the first point of departure for us to achieve justice is around ensuring that there's adequate monitoring and enforcement, even for the new industries, because they're not, we're not going to say RE plants are not going to destroy our environment. No, they still need to be monitored that they're not destroying the environment. So if we first deal with monitoring and making sure that we enforce regulations, that's the point of departure. Because then if we do that, even if we create another mining sector, they will have to play by the rules. Because currently that's not happening. So for me, I mean, I was saying to some colleagues from the labor unions, the perfect example of how corporates operate with impunity. Look at what happened at Stelfontein. Yeah. They blame Zamazamas to say, you are going there, we are mining illegally. They never went to the mine owner and said, you were supposed to have rehabilitated this hole a long time ago. Yeah. Now they're shifting the blame But the actual person who was supposed to be held accountable is the mine owner, because he had an obligation to say, I will rehabilitate this land. And they never did. Now, if you drive around Mpumalanga, there are a lot of pieces of land that haven't been rehabilitated. Even if you go to Joburg, you still have like your, what they call it, your water dams, your slurry ponds.
Yeah.
That water has been there for years. If it overflows, people living close by will have to be evacuated. But not even a single politician says, in terms of our law, this was supposed to have been rehabilitated a long time ago. Why are not doing it? So it's one example. So if you look, if we go close by, 2022, Komati was closed.
Yeah.
Komati Power Station.
Power Station, yes.
But at Komati, we are seated with huge pieces of land containing ash. And we know that that ash also have some chemical content. So if it's dry, it blows, it will impact on people's health. And currently, Eskom cannot even communicate whether they have a plan or not about dealing with that ash. So it's still a huge social issue, because for as long as that ash is there and it's not taken care of, it will impact people's health. But on the other hand, we're talking about an old power station, which did not even have a lining on its ash dam. So there will be seepage, and all of those chemicals will contaminate underground water, and it will flow downstream. So the people downstream from Komati will experience that kind of contamination on the groundwater. So these are, I would say for me, simple things government can deal with, but they're not dealing with them.
Why do you think is the reason? They do not have capacity, or it might be a conflict of interest? Some of them have interest in companies.
Maybe capacity to a certain extent, but I wouldn't want to argue about capacity. We have a lot of government agencies. I mean, we have Mintech assisting government to do that. We have CSIR. We have Council for Geoscience. These are government institutions. They're agencies. And they can do water monitoring. They can advise the department to say, we need to act. These are the interventions that are needed. But nobody's taking that route. Even if the Water and Sanitation Department would say they don't have the capacity, but they can tap into the expertise of those agencies and assist them. We have community people doing their own water monitoring. They alert government, they make complaints, but they're not getting a response. So you cannot say government is not aware. They are aware, but the question is, do they have the political will to act? I doubt. I doubt. So for me, that's where the trick comes in. Yeah.
Okay, but what will be the best way? You're talking about to end this whole thing of in your region here, maybe to ensure that people live in a clean environment that is really free of pollutants in the air. They are not getting sick. What needs to, you spoke about phasing out all fossil fuel industries. Is that the solution? Phase them out completely and then green energy?
Bring in clean energy, make sure that people are at the center of decision making. I mean, like I said, for me, I said the first point will be monitor and enforce. Secondly, you need to engage people properly, not the normal tick box exercise to say, I've gone now. Work with people, develop a plan, put in resources and implement. Now, if we look into why consultation is important, working with people genuinely is important. The only power station that has been closed, not decommissioned, closed, is Komati. And I think as an afterthought, they wanted to make it a JT project, a just transition project. So the World Bank and Eskom were driving the process. But instead of meaningfully going to the communities, engage with them, they decided to send researchers. And then they came back and said, we consulted. And then the question was, with who? You know? But what I think the most important learnings was that the people were not consulted. Eskom developed a plan, they came up with projects, but people didn't even understand what projects are those, you know. And then as an alternative, people started mobilizing themselves, okay, with the support of different people, groundWork, later in government, others.
Yeah.
But people started mobilizing themselves. They developed their own plan. Interestingly is, people were not only concerned about livelihoods,
Yeah.
you know, they were concerned, they came up with projects which had a more social impact around. So people were concerned about their health, infrastructure like bridges, bus shelters, transport that would move them from Komati to Middleburg, transport for their school kids. They were concerned about health facilities. So those are the kind, early childhood development centers. Those were the things people were concerned with. And the projects from Eskom, most of them were too short-term. They were training people on welding. And that's basically for construction. It's two short-term jobs. And those people have been used to working either at the mine or working at Eskom, some of them permanent, some of them are contractors. Now, all of that was not there anymore. And it was not clear as to what's going to happen to the people living in the area. Were they going to get proper servitudes? I can tell you that getting proper servitudes, because Eskom used to provide horticultural services. Now that the town is under Steve Tshwete municipality, that is not being provided adequately. You could see long grass all over the place. So those are some of the simple things we need to figure out in our plan to say, how are we going to absorb this town? Are we going to be in a position to provide those services? If no, can we employ local people, to work and provide those services to people? So that plan was not there. It was missing. And now we need to think about how do we do that. The other thing is, we're talking the state here. Eskom is a state. Whether we say
it is.
One of the things is these entities used to own a lot of assets. And government, whether municipality or provincial, they still have a lot of assets. The question is, can we make use of those assets for people's development? You can listen to any other ordinary business person. They will tell you that it's difficult to rent a property or to have access to a property. Some people want land for development. It's difficult for people to have access to land. Some want water. But because of all those red tapes, it's very difficult. So one of the things we kept saying was, can we understand what kind of assets Eskom has in Komati? Can we understand which assets belong to the municipality, which assets belong to the mine, so that when we say we want a clinic, we could also begin to say, oh, this is a building, it's been abandoned for the past 10 years, let's refurbish this building and use it as a clinic. It provides good service. In Komati, they don't have a community hall. Their buildings, some of them were owned by mines. We could use those buildings for a community hall. But because we never had a plan, nobody engaged with the people to say, what is it that you want? How do we create jobs? How do we better and improve your lives?
The problem of people not being consulted is all over. We're talking to one foundation, but that is pro fossil fuels. That is saying, keep the mines, keep the fossil fuel industry as it is. They're saying for the just energy transition program, government never consulted communities, which is becoming a big problem now.
I met a couple of guys, I think 2-3 years back at Komati, apparently again, and they were pro-coal. And I said to them, we're not going to fight in this meeting because I'm anti-coal and I'm clear about my position and I know why. You pro-coal, you've got your position, you know why. But in this current setup, there is one thing common between us. We don't have enough information to make decisions. Now, if your Eskom and government gives us enough information, then we can go through that information and take informed decisions, then we can go out there and lobby people based on an informed basis. But currently, some of the time, we go through our struggles and we take decisions from an uninformed perspective, which is very problematic. I mean, again, the same thing happened at Komati. You know, the power station was closed. It was going to be closed in any event. It's old. At the time of closure, only one unit was operating. Other units have been closed before. So operating Komati was no longer economically viable. So it had to close. So, but I think what was important, and this is one of the learnings that came out of Komati, to say, these guys have a schedule. We've got a calendar. For instance, by 2030, Grootfontein must close. Now, the question might be, are we working with the people at Grootfontein right now to develop a plan? And then we can start implementing some of these projects, make sure they create jobs, so that by the time Grootfontein is closed, we've got a very sustainable economic system that we've created before the closure. You know, people know which sectors they can go and work at, but already there's vibrancy. We are not going to say, oh, I'll be creating another ghost town. No, you've already addressed those concerns before the closure itself. So that's one of the critical things that's missing, to say, are we working with communities to develop a plan, make sure that, like I said, it needs to be properly resourced, and then we start implementing. By the time 2030 catches with us, some of the projects are already underway. You know, people are working. So you'll find that some of the people at the power stations might be redeployed to other plants, but then those who are retained, they can be reskilled, and then they could be redeployed in other sectors. But currently that's not happening. And you could see how that is not happening if you look into Komati. It's like we're all over the place. We talking, what they call it, agroponics. You know, to me, it's a technical project. Maybe you might need 10, 15 people during construction, but after that, probably about 2, 3 people might run the plant. You know, it's not enough number of jobs compared to how the coal sector used to absorb people. We need to think about manufacturing, creating a value chain so that we can absorb more people into the work stream. We need to bring in other sectors. It's not just about energy. We need to think about our transport system, our health system. Do we have enough people? If people are going to go to a clinic at 4, it means we don't have enough staff. And there's a clear sign that we need to train nurses. We need to train people who can work at our health institutions so that they can be in a position to attend to these people. But we're not doing that. So even though we see an opportunity, I don't think we're capitalizing on that.
I see. Going back to this deadly air case, okay, the minister appealed, and the appeal was dismissed, which basically means the Department of Environmental Affairs needs to implement what the court demands of them to make sure that the air is clean.
No, the minister didn't appeal the entire judgment.
Okay.
The minister only appealed, it was only the portion 4, which basically referred to, I think it was more a question of interpretation as to whether the minister must or may develop implementation regulations. And
technical.
The technical thing. And the argument, I think it was Baba Chris then, but also Dion took that over. The argument was, the minister said, I must use my discretion. I may develop these regulations. It's not a must. And our argument was, based on the levels of pollution and its impact on people's health, it then becomes a necessity. Which means now, because of the negative impacts, you had an obligation to develop the regulations. So that was our argument.
Great.
And fortunately, the court found in our favor to say, it is now a necessity because there's this agency to deal with this thing. So it became a necessity. Now, because of that necessity, you had to. So it was a question of now, you must develop the implementation regulations. Not you may, but you must because of the impacts.
Okay. Well, what is now expected of government
The implementation regulations have been developed. They've been adopted, like I said, in September, not September, August. Now I think it's a question of implementation and enforcement.
Yeah, in simple terms, to an ordinary person who doesn't understand, what do they need to do? They need to make sure that the monitoring stations are functional. Make sure that the industries are not exceeding in terms of
their licenses
that they are producing or releasing into the air. That's basically that.
And they need to make sure that most of this information is easily accessible to the public. And they need to make sure that they enforce. So if somebody is found to be non-compliant, that person must be penalized.
Yeah.
So that's all there is now. I know the Department of Health has come on board because of the judgment, which I would say is a very important milestone. Because what we expect from the Department of Health is that if the air quality officer is going to say to us, for the month of June, we have 4 exceedances, then we're expecting the Department of Health to come back and say to us, based on the exceedances we've had in June, we've had 1,000 hospital admissions. We can report that 10 people died because of that. That kind of information.
Now there can be exact statistics of people getting sick directly from the...
but they can tell us in these facilities, this is what we've picked. Even if it's like maybe a facility closer to the source. But we also expect the department to say, we had exceedances in sulfur dioxide, and this was the source, and this is what happened, because we don't see a lot of that happening. So, for instance, a couple of years back, I was fighting because when we went into the monitoring, we saw there were high levels of sulfur dioxide reported in the monitoring station in KwaZulu, Hendrina. And the closest source of pollution is Hendrina and Arnold Power Station. But then the government wanted to tell us we don't know the source. But there's no any other industry in Hendrina. So it was clear which 2 areas could contribute to this. But they didn't even want to go and inspect what was happening in either of these 2 power plants. But also it was very clear which source of sulfur could be found in that area. So one of the things is about identifying the actual source, to say this is the source, and therefore it must be known. We need to act, because if it's not known, with the ambient air quality, we are just monitoring the cumulative impacts of all. I mean, whether you are burning at a household level or somebody is paying tires, all of that goes to the atmosphere. So it does not pinpoint the actual source.
Because there are many sources.
There are many sources. But now you need to be direct and say, this particular facility produced the following pollutants at this time, and this particular pollutant was in non-compliance, and therefore we've issued a directive to say they must bring this into compliance or whatever. So that's basically what is needed. They need to serve those notices to say, bring your plant into compliance. If not so, you'll face the wrath of the law. I mean, Kendall has been, and it still is, polluting. And government didn't even have systems or tools to verify information or the reports that industry are getting. And I know that with the assistance of one of our colleagues, Professor Eugene Cairncross, we requested some of the reports, we compared to their licenses and what was being reported at ESCOM. And there were huge disparities. We picked up that Kendall is actually underreporting their emissions. And when we alerted eMalahleni, the province and national office, it was only then they acted. They took Kendall to court. I know ESCOM has been trying to get an out-of-court settlement for that, but what I'm trying to drive home is that the department failed to verify the reports they're getting. They failed to monitor. Hence, Kendall was in a position to under-report. But if they had their own systems in place, they would have managed to say, oh, wait a minute, it cannot happen.
Yeah. Okay.
Because this is what we measured versus what we've reported.
Okay. No. On that note, yeah, thanks a lot. Unless there's something some point you want to clarify, I think we've covered.
I think I've covered from my side.
Yeah.
But for me, I think the parting shot would be, there's only one way for us to move away from coal.
Yeah.
And that is through actively engaging civil society residents and make sure that at the end of the day, they inform decision making. Unless we do that, we are going to create ghost towns.
Okay. Thanks.